Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew Friedman, Matt F. The Oracle. Welcome to the Betting Pros podcast brought to you by BetMGM, where you can get a risk-free bet of up to $1,000 with the promo code BettingPros on first deposit. All right, here with me to talk NFL Week 17 best bets is ClevTA, proprietor of CleveAnalytics.com and a contributor to the Hammer Betting Network. Cleve, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, man, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, so ClevTA, what does that stand for?
Well, Cleve is, I'm from this, I live in the city of Cleveland, big Cleveland sports fan. And then TA is just some initials. So it's funny when Twitter was created, how many years ago, 12, 13 years ago, might even longer than that, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
No one knew it would end up like this. So I just needed a quick username, and my buddy had same thing, had Cleve, and then he had his real first name. So I just did that with my initials, and it's kind of stuck ever since then, and I haven't changed it. So I was just kind of on a whim, and so I've stuck with it.
Yeah. So part of me figured it was for Cleveland, which, if you go to Twitter, look at Cleve's handle, you'll see Cleveland Browns, I think, in the header there. So like that seemed rather obvious, but part of me was also like thinking, okay, like if you were to say CLV, like if you were to pronounce it, it might be Cleve, you know what I mean? So like I see the C, the L, and the V, and I always think, oh, that like Cleve is like, it stands for closing line value. Even though like I knew it didn't, but just in my brain, I've always made that association.
That's funny. I never even thought about that, but it's not a bad thing. But a lot of controversy with the CLV, right? So, but yeah, no, that's funny. I've never thought about it, but it could be.
Yeah, I mean, of course. So you actually at Cleve Analytics, you have a piece, I think, looking at CLV, and so some people will talk about how CLV doesn't matter. Some people think that obviously, like, closing line value is the holy grail. And for people who aren't aware of what closing line value is, it's the difference between the line where you bet it and where the closing line is. And so if you bet something at +3 and it moves to +1, then you got two points of closing line value. And so that in general would feel like a good thing if you were betting. Of course, if the bet didn't hit, then you would be like, closing line value doesn't matter. Where are you on the closing line value spectrum in terms of it mattering, it not mattering? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think on a kind of one-off basis, it probably isn't a huge deal. I mean, you'd like to get it, but it doesn't really tell you much. But I think in the long run, as you kind of accumulate CLV, I think it's a good way to recognize whether you're a sharp bettor or not, in my opinion, over the long run. Because if you're consistently beating a market that is supposedly efficient or close to efficient, then you're doing something right. So I think it's a good sign in that regard. So I think if you look at it from a long stretch, you want to get as much CLV as possible. But yeah, I think I was on the Broncos -2.5 last week. I think it closed 3.5.
Yeah.
Is that a smart bet? You know what I mean? Like, so it doesn't work out. And I can just tell you, I do a better job probably of predicting where the line will close more so than whether it'll win or not. And, I don't know, is that at the end of the day, I'm not sure if that's more valuable, but yeah, you want to be ahead of the market as much as possible. And especially when the sharper bettors with the influential bettors are the ones shaping a lot of these lines, that means you're on the same side of them and you have a better line than a lot of them. So at the end of the day, you want that obviously more often than not.
Yeah, well, I was right there with you last week on Denver at at that number, and of course that did not feel good. Obviously that went against us, but yeah, I mean, closing line value, I think it's, as you said, I feel like I'm better at predicting in some instances where the market will go instead of where it should go, or where the line should be. And that ultimately does have some value there. How's the season gone for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been okay. I would say from sides perspective, I'm in kind of the lower 50% range, which is fine. Historically, whether it be my personal plays, which are typically kind of mid 50s, or I've entered these circa millions contests and the Westgate Super contests for the last decade, and I think I've hit 60% plus like 3 of the last 4 years. So this is a down year, but in general, it's a positive. And then I've really started to do a lot more with props this year in the regular season. I typically had kind of waited more for the playoffs, and because lines are way more efficient and there's a lot less games. But I started to do a lot more from a prop perspective during the season, and I'm actually hitting 65% in props, which is crazy to me. And it's funny because there's a lot of there's sharper money in the market these days, and there are times where like I'll be on one side and I'll hear, hey, people will message me, hey, do you know so and so, real sharp prop better is on the other side, and I'm like, okay, and I win, I'll win by a mile, and it's like, okay, give myself a pat on the back. I don't know, maybe I'm doing something different, but I've really, I think, just honed in on a couple of props per week that really just find good, the best possible matchup in my opinion, because I don't think that the opening lines are really that sharp. I mean, these sharp openers are never really. I mean, that Taysom Hill number last week was 34.5 against my Browns. That was like the dumbest. I remember I was messaging someone, said, have you seen a Taysom prop yet? And I said, I go, watch, it's going to be in the low 30s. And I can't imagine, anyone not betting it, up to at least 40. And so it opened up, I think 34.5 and bet up to, I think it closed at like 52 or something crazy, right? Like that.
Yeah.
And that was just the most obvious thing. That's something that, the books are not, they're not paying attention to one-off Taysom Hill props, right? They're not putting that much effort into it. So, you could take advantage of those mispricings. And so I've been able to do that a lot and really have hit at a really high rate and, spread it around as many books as I can so I don't get limited. So far it's doing okay.
Yeah, it's interesting that you kind of got into props after getting into sides and totals. The way I got into betting was through fantasy. Like I was really into fantasy, had a full-time job in fantasy sports. And then the company I was working for got more into sports betting. And so I started to get into player props that way. And then from there moved into sides and totals. And I feel like I was a little bit too early on the props, because the prop market has become much more liquid than it was when I was really getting into it 5 years ago. And so I had success, like quote unquote success then, but like all those accounts, they got limited very quickly. And I think now accounts aren't quite as quick to get limited in the prop market. And so it's just interesting the way that people get into betting and the areas where they gravitate towards.
Yeah, and I will say, because I've been doing sides for 25 years probably at this point, since I was in college, losing a lot of money when I was in my 20s until I figured things out. And I will say, I think the one area with the prop market that I've understood, not just the kind of pure matchup, but I think you kind of have to marry understanding, game flow, obviously, game script with the actual matchup. And that's really important there. And I think some of the, there are some guys that just do props or DFS that aren't good at understanding the sides. And so they just say, a team is, 7-point favorite, so I'm going to gravitate towards a running back, right? Because game script. But if you are successful betting sides, and I think I am, in general, like if I think an underdog actually is live at a 7-point underdog, I'm much more likely to take a look at those running back markets than others would. So that creates a little bit of value on my end. So, and vice versa. So I think that does help. It gives me a tiny little edge here and there. Just because a lot of the sharp prop guys don't do sides, so they don't really are able to evaluate it that way. So I can take advantage from that perspective. So, it's a nice little marriage between the two, and it's taken me time. And look, I used to do kind of prime time props, and I've gone through stretches. I mean, Twitter probably 4 or 5 years ago, I remember I went through a stretch. I was just giving out like a one prop per prime time games. I think I won 15 in a row, to the point where like I would just put up, I think it was Sony Michel was on New England as a rookie, and I put up a prop that was like 35 at the time. And I think within 20 minutes, my buddy texted me, goes, that thing is like 45 right now. Like, how the hell did you move it to that degree? Like, I don't know. Like, it was so illiquid, like you said, just 5 years ago. Now it's not to that. I don't think it's to that degree, but so I've had some success in the past, just never really focused on it. Now I'm taking probably a handful per Sunday, whereas maybe I would only do prime time in the past.
Yeah. All right. So great conversation there. We are recording this on Thursday. This morning, I posted my projected spreads for each game. And one line that caught my eye was Cardinals plus 3.5 at the Falcons. And I'm looking at the odds page now at Betting Pros. The number is still 3.5. Of course, that number is 3.5 at BetMGM, where you can get that risk-free bet of up to $1,000 with the promo code Betting Pros on first deposit. All right, there are some trends that you can look at for this game. Cliff Kingsbury on the road has historically been great. Underdog, he's been good as a road dog. 16-5-2 against the spread. And then Arthur Smith, like the Falcons have no home field advantage. He's 4-10 against the spread at home, 1-4 against the spread as a home favorite. And I'm looking at Desmond Ridder and I think like, okay, sure, the Falcons should be favored in this matchup, but favored by more than a field goal, that just feels like it's too much. The Falcons opened the year 6-0 against the spread, 3-3 on the money line. They were an overachieving cover machine to open the year. But since then, they are 2-7 against the spread and on the money line. The market has caught up to the Falcons, and the Falcons have regressed as the season has progressed, especially on offense, and especially since switching to Desmond Ridder. In weeks 1 through 6, they averaged 24.3 points per game. In weeks 7 through 16, 18.3 points per game. And then since they switched to Ridder, 13.5 points per game. Now it's only 2 games, but the sample has not been good. He's had, the team has had only 4.7 yards per pass attempt with Ridder. In weeks 1 through 6, they had 6.7 yards per pass attempt. Like they've really regressed, especially since they switched to Ridder. And the Cardinals, they're a bottom 5 team, like in anyone's power ratings, but they have a clear edge with Colt McCoy at quarterback. He's cleared the concussion protocol. He's playing this week. If you look at what McCoy has done after the Browns era, he's had 6.4 adjusted yards per attempt. In his 2 years with the Cardinals, he's had 6.1 adjusted yards per attempt. Like he's a competent veteran backup. He's not great, but he's competent, and that's way more than we can say for Ridder, who's been, I think, a clear downgrade on Marcus Mariota. Again, the Falcons, I think they should be favored, but not by more than a field goal. And they're 1-2 against the spread as favorites this year. Their one ATS victory as a favorite was against the Bears in week 11 when Justin Fields suffered his shoulder injury. So not exactly the circumstances that you would look for. So, raw, unproven rookie quarterback at home at a home field advantage that doesn't really amount to all that much, laying too many points. I'm just looking at the Cardinals in this spot, even though I think the Cardinals are really bad as a football team, but I have this projected at 2.25. Cleve, I think you're on this side with me. Cardinals plus 3.5. What do you think?
Yeah, I am. I actually took it yesterday at 3.5, and I totally agree. I think this line should be at 3. I think it'll close at 3. We'll see what happens, but totally agree. I mean, the Colt McCoy from Trace McSorley, Colt McCoy. I mean, the market, unless the market had a really strong feeling that Colt McCoy is going to play, and maybe they did, to go from it was only 4 to 3.5 to me is just that's way too. That's not enough. I mean, to me, McSorley's 50th out of 52 quarterbacks in EPA per play. He's dead last in success rate. He's not an NFL quarterback. Colt McCoy, like you said, is competent. Now, if you look at his numbers this year, not as good from an EPA perspective, but you have to consider 2 of his starts were against San Francisco and New England. And New England wasn't a start, but it was 1 or 2 plays in with Kyler. That's a top 2 defenses in the NFL from an EPA perspective. So it's not really fair to judge him on that. You're going up against an Atlanta defense that's last in success rate. They are last in pressure rate. So a bad offensive line doesn't really need to worry about, a defense in Atlanta there. Yeah, and the only area that I would have been worried about was potentially motivation for a team like Arizona. But, the fact that J.J. Watt is announcing his retirement, I think helps here because you got a defense that really looks up to the guy. They're going to play hard for him. I don't think they're just going to totally quit in his final 2 games of his career. I find that hard to believe. Still got weapons on offense with DeAndre Hopkins and James Conner and, Hollywood Brown. So it's just, it's hard for me to see a bad team like Atlanta with a rookie quarterback who's done nothing, laying over a field goal. I think this definitely closes at 3. So I'm with you here.
All right, one game you were looking at, Texans -4 on the road in Jacksonville. And the Texans, I had them as the worst team in the league a few weeks ago. And then they did well against the Cowboys, almost beat the Cowboys. They played well against the Chiefs and then outright beat the Titans. And then now here they are. Not on the road. The Texans are at home hosting the Jags. Man, what do you see here in this game?
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't really have anything to do with the recent performance from the Texans. If you look at just pure power ratings, you would not get to this number. And I took 4.5 yesterday. It's 4 right now. You would never get to this number. This is more like any legitimate power rating get you to 6, maybe 6.5. You might get to 7, but there's a couple things at play here that's why I don't use pure power ratings, because for one, motivation. And I know Doug Peterson yesterday said that, they're going to play all their starters, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to sit guys who maybe tweak something in the first half, or, Trayvon Walker's questionable, didn't play last week. Like maybe they hold him out. Maybe they rotate guys in and out. Like there's just a lot of different variations of, not necessarily going pushing full force. They have less than a 10% chance of making the wild card anyway, even if they win this game and then lose next week. So, and I'm sure they are game planning for Tennessee. They're maybe they're doing a little bit on Houston, but they're going to put a lot of energy in the look ahead here, because it means so much. So to me, that right there just knocks down some of the the gap in the power ratings. And then from a matchup perspective, Trevor Lawrence has been playing out of his mind lately. He historically has really struggled against his Texans Lovie Smith defense, this cover 2 defense. There's a reason why they're 0-3 straight up and against the spread against the Texans in his career. Against cover 2, he's 40th out of 44 quarterbacks in completion percentage. He has 1 TD, 6 interceptions since the beginning of last season. And that includes, some games I know recently where, maybe he's improved, and you can make the claim that he's gotten better. He has not solved this defense. So clearly there's something from that schematic perspective that, he has problems with. Now, maybe he solves some of that. Who knows? But I'm willing to be okay, backing the Texans, fourth time facing Lawrence and potentially having his number. And then you see, his left tackle Cam Robinson is out. Walker Little, who's 98th out of 110 tackles in PFF pass block grade, is going to start. It's a huge downgrade. I mentioned Trayvon Walker may not play. They also lost. It was an underrated season-ending injury to edge rusher Dwayne Smoot, second on the team in pressure rate. He's one of the top 30 pass rushers according to PFF. That's a big loss there. So you're potentially missing 2 of your 3 best defensive linemen. And this is not a good Jags defense in general. I mean, this is a bottom 5 defense by most metrics, especially through the year. So I just think that, from that perspective, you look and you see Lawrence and the Jags are 0-4 against the spread in his career when he's a favorite of 3 or more points. And they've lost all 4 straight up, by the way. It's hard for me to back a young team like the Jags that might be looking ahead, that might be sitting, rotating some guys with, Trevor Lawrence, who struggles against this type of defense. He always has. And, again, the Texans are feisty. They haven't quit. So I'm okay taking anything over a field goal here.
Really interesting. I have this projected at 4, but I am very open to the idea that I am not discounting the Jags enough because of 2 things you mentioned. One, Jacksonville looking ahead and preparing for that matchup with the Titans in week 18, and then the injuries. Cam Robinson, a not insignificant injury there that they're dealing with. Trayvon Walker potentially not playing, and then Smoot, as you mentioned, who's out. So, I can see it. If I'm not betting it. If I were to bet it, I would be on the Texans.
And I will say, some people say this maybe is too much of a overreaction to what the Texans have done lately, but I don't think it is. I mean, if you look earlier in the season, these 2 teams played in Jacksonville, the line closed only 7. And I wouldn't say, Texans were by far dead last in everyone's power rating back then. Yeah. The Jags were started off the season. If you remember, they started off the season with some impressive wins. They lost close to the Eagles. So, they were highly rated early on. It was that middle season dip where they started to get a little bit of a setback. So if you look at, if you're -7 at home and you do kind of the home and away, flip it, being -4.5 in Jacksonville is actually kind of cheap. So, I don't think that there's any sort of pure line value here that you were taking advantage of from a Jacksonville perspective. I think the line, just from a pure power rating perspective, isn't that far off of where it should be. So, I'm okay here. I just think, I just think that maybe Trevor Lawrence solves the cover 2, and I look like an idiot, and the Texans get blown out. But I'm okay taking a shot here on them.
Yeah, and one more item here: Jags playing their 4th game out of 5 on the road. So, not you would think an overwhelming matchup, but the road that tends to wear after that many games away from home here. All right, one game I'm looking at here: Browns +2 at Commanders, and let me make sure that's the current line here. It's disgusting. It is 2.5 at points bet for people who are out there getting the best of the number, but +2 Browns at the Commanders. Carson Wentz is, since the 2017 knee injury, which I think really altered his career, 26-36 against the spread, 14-21 against the spread as a favorite since then. And this game, to me, really comes down to the Browns' pass defense against Carson Wentz. In weeks 1 through 11, the Browns' defense was absolutely terrible. Key players were in and out of the starting lineup based on injuries, and they allowed teams to score pretty much at will. But since week 12, they've been pretty stout. In weeks 1 through 11, 26.9 points allowed per game. Since week 12, 14.8 points per game. In the first part of the season, they were number 31 in defensive EPA. Since week 12, number 3 in defensive EPA, and especially strong against the pass, number 1 in defensive dropback EPA. Now, to contextualize this, those 5 recent games have come against Tom Brady, who is, not the Brady of previous seasons, Kyle Allen, who is barely an NFL quarterback, Joe Burrow, who obviously is fantastic, but Tyler Huntley after him, and then Andy Dalton, who is, on that borderline between starter and backup. That's not a great cohort. So the statistics there for the Browns probably a little skewed, but it's not as if Carson Wentz is any better than those guys, than that collective cohort of passers. He's been mediocre this year, 6.3 adjusted yards per attempt. And that's the same mark that he's had since 2020, 6.3 adjusted yards per attempt. That's who he is at this point in his career. He's a mediocre passer going against a pretty good pass defense. And Deshaun Watson for the Browns, he has not been good, right, since he returned. And that's even if you exclude last week's weather-impacted game, he still has just 6.2 adjusted yards per attempt since returning to action in week 13. But we know who he is. He is better than Carson Wentz. In his 4 years with the Texans, he had 8.6 adjusted yards per attempt. He's the better quarterback, and I am still expecting Wentz to struggle against a rejuvenated pass defense. So if I can have the better quarterback, probably the better head coach, and I can get that at less than a field goal, I'm probably going to do it. So Browns +2, that's where I'm looking. Cleve, I think you're also on this side of the game.
Yeah, and just to be, straightforward, I'm not just because I'm a Browns fan. I will bet or I will stay away from games I don't like. So this is not a bias play, but yeah, I'm on the Browns as well. So the only question is motivation, but first of all, there's no tanking going on because they don't have a 1st-round pick, and I think they want to play for Deshaun Watson. They really want to see what they've got there. So I don't think that they're going to. A, they're not sitting guys, and B, I think the team is actually going to play, and that's hard to judge anyway. You really can't make these. I mean, you're just guessing if you're making a decision on motivation. When a team is kind of out of it. But I agree with everything you said. I mean, Wentz, people forget how bad he was to start the year. He was 29th out of 33 quarterbacks in both EPA and success rate before he got hurt. And that includes, if you look at the pass defenses he played, the Bears, the Lions, the Jags, and the Titans, that's 3 of the bottom 7 in EPA from a pass D perspective. The Titans are 21st. So it's not like he was struggling against a bad competition. So, I mean, the Browns are better than, I think, all of those defenses anyway. And then when you exclude garbage time, I mean, the Commanders as a whole, their offense was 31st in the NFL in those 6 games. I mean, they were going to bench Wentz anyway. So him being hurt was just kind of a convenient thing. So they're pretty desperate here. And it's hard for me to imagine a team that really doesn't believe in any of their quarterbacks to just all of a sudden be laying close to a field goal against a competent team. And the Browns were, if you look at all the advanced metrics, I mean, they are a top 12 to 15 team by most every, advanced database out there. I think that some of what happened the last week is really skewing this. It's funny, you see all the discussion on Twitter again, absent all the not off the field stuff. We're not going to discuss that with Deshaun Watson. Just purely his play. I mean, the people are using pure data and numbers from last week and the prior week in snow against a top 5 defense in the Ravens to somehow discredit the trade and talk about it being a bust like Russell Wilson. I mean, you're talking about those are the worst weather conditions the NFL has maybe ever seen. So wind chill, I mean, we're talking about -1 degree or worse, 50-mile-an-hour winds. The grass was impossible to even run on. I mean, Amari Cooper dropped a touchdown. There was 3 drop touchdowns in that game. For the season, Deshaun Watson's had the highest drop rate of any quarterback in the NFL. He really stunk against Houston. That was one of the worst performances you'll see. He was a lot better against Cincinnati, and then he beat the Ravens, again, a top 5 defense. He did, kind of made the plays he had to. He played pretty well there. And then last week, like just impossible to compete in those conditions. I mean, just to put that in perspective, Josh Allen in that hurricane weather game last year on that Monday night against New England, that was probably the closest comparison from a win perspective. He was 15 of 30 for 145 yards in that game, but no one says a word about that, right? Like that. And that's a guy with a cannon for an arm. Like that's just impossible to throw in. So I think people are just making way too much of that. Personally, when I watch the games, he's gotten a lot better. He's a lot more comfortable than he was in that first start. So, the only issue here is you're going to have to run the ball against a really good Washington run defense, and that's obviously not a good matchup for the Browns. So it's going to have to be Deshaun Watson who wins this game. But I have faith that Carson Wentz is just not the guy to consistently sustain drives. And I think if you're getting points here, you got to take it with the Browns.
All right, one game that you were looking at, Colts at the Giants. This was 6, moved to 5.5 at most places, still 6 at BetMGM. And I gotta say, I have value on the Colts as well. I have this projected at 4.5. I did bet the Giants too soon. I bet them on Monday before the Colts played on Monday Night Football. In retrospect, I think I reached on that bet. But after adjusting power ratings, everything, once the week was over, I'm now on Colts at plus 4.5. I still don't know if I would actually want to bet them, though. There's just something about this team that just makes me, I feel weak. Like, I don't have the will to bet when I have a number that's on this team. But what are you seeing that gives you confidence in the Colts?
Yeah, so this is the thing about the NFL that I tell people all the time, like the bets that make you queasy, like you just mentioned, uncomfortable, those usually mean that you're on the right side, because if it was that easy, then everybody would win, right? Nobody wants to bet the Colts. This look ahead was 3, by the way, before that Monday night debacle. So you're talking about a full 3-point change in spread with no injuries to the Colts off of one game. Like that's pretty egregious. And anyone who does this, I've been doing it for 20 plus years. Like that's an overreaction. It just clearly is. And it doesn't mean it's going to win, but you're getting the best number. You are taking advantage of a biased market, a near-term biased market that is just scared to death to back the Colts. And you've got to take those. For me, I got to take that 10 out of 10 times. And if it, like I said, hopefully it hits at a higher rate than 55, 60%. But I just have to do it. And really, so a couple of things with that. So first of all, the defense is still playing hard. I mean, they held a good Chargers offense at 20 points. It wasn't as if they got blown out of the water by that offense. So they're keeping them in games. They're a top 10 defense. They I think it was the Chargers had 8 possessions that started in their own territory. They only scored on 3 of those drives. So it's not as if they just let the Chargers march up and down the field. So I feel good against let's call the Giants what they are. They're a bad offense. They have no receiving core. It's pretty much Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones on the read option. And so it's going to be a lower scoring game. You're getting 6 points in a total that's 37.5, 38. So from that perspective alone, you're getting value. And then look, Nick Foles was awful last week. There's no doubt about it. But one thing that I think that kind of went a little bit unnoticed that people didn't take into account, because I know some sharp money was on the Colts. I think it closed 3. If you look at what some of the quotes that Nick Foles had midweek, he never even took first team reps until I think Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah.
And when they made that announcement, he was running scout team. So he had zero chemistry with any of those receivers. And if you watch that game, there were a couple of plays where like Alec Pierce was running like a slant and he threw the other way. He thought he was running an out. Like it happened multiple times. So clearly he was rusty. He didn't have any chemistry. Now you get another full week of practice. He's going to look better. He just is. That's as bad as it can look. They're going to be able, I mean, they can do some things. They can run the ball on this Giants defense is one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. I mean, this is one of the bottom 5 EPA defenses in the NFL, and you're laying 6. They were laying 4.5 to a bad Houston team at home about a month ago. So you're telling me that Houston back in mid-November is a 1.5 better than this Colts team right now? I just can't buy that. Not with this defense. And you still got weapons. You still got Michael Pittman. You still got Pierce. You got tight ends that can play. You know, I just think that it's just an overreaction. It's a veteran team. They should be able. They're not going to quit. Now he's going to have to contend with Wink Martindale blitz packages, which is going to be tough. But one thing I did look at this year, I have a game log of all the EPA performances by every team, and I went and looked at the 10 worst EPA performances this season, because last week's Monday night game against the Chargers was one of the worst we've seen this year. If all you did was blindly back those teams the next week, you'd go 7-3 against the spread, because what happens is, again, it's that overreaction to one horrible week. We saw it actually earlier in this year. The worst offensive performance all season was this Colts team with Sam Ehlinger against the Patriots when they lost 26-3. They hired Jeff Saturday. Nobody wants to back them.
Yeah.
The line was 6 in Las Vegas, and they won outright. Like, it's not saying this is the exact same situation, but it's not that much different. And it's a much, Vegas is much better than the Giants at this point. So, yeah, like all that being said, I just think it's an overreaction. If this line was 3.5, I'm not going to take the Colts, but at 6.5, 6 or 5.5, I'm fine having them, with their defense, keep it close here.
Yeah, you mentioned the Raiders there. That is one team I am willing to bet against at this point. And 49ers -10 on the road in Las Vegas. That feels like, that's a big number. I logged this on Monday at -5. I put it in the Betting Pros app. By the way, you can sync up with sportsbooks in the Betting Pros app. You can get free betting advice and picks. You can track different experts in your own bets, and you can set alerts. So we monitor all the major sportsbooks. When one of them has a line move that hits a threshold you've set, you get an alert that tells you where you can make the bet. You can download the app today in the Apple or Google Play Store. 49ers -10. It's a big number. But I have this projected at 11.25 right now. And Kyle Shanahan on the road, including the postseason, has been pretty strong for his career, 30-20 against the spread. Brock Purdy, I'm not going to overweight the sample, but he's looked good in his 3.5, 4 games as the primary quarterback for the 49ers, 3-0 against the spread to open his career. And with the benching of Derek Carr, the Raiders are starting backup quarterback Jarrett Stidham. On the plus side, Stidham, 4-year veteran. He spent his entire career under head coach Josh McDaniels, first with the Patriots and then with the Raiders this year. So he knows the system. He should know the system very well. That said, there are a lot of negatives. He's a forgotten former 4th rounder with little NFL experience, no NFL starts. He has just 61 pass attempts in his career, and he has looked awful in those 61 pass attempts. He's converted that into just 342 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. I believe 3.3 adjusted yards per attempt is the mark that he has for his career, which is like sub backup level type of mark. Like, that's what you would expect out of a rookie quarterback who's a 3rd stringer who's just thrown in on short preparation. He also has a 9.0% sack rate. He offers nothing as a runner. And then he's going against, if not the best defense in the league, top 3 defense in the 49ers, number 1 in EPA per play, number 2 in dropback EPA. Just a terrible matchup. And regardless of whatever you think about Carr, I think Stidham is an unquestioned downgrade, a significant downgrade from Carr. So given the matchup, I think he's drawing dead. And if this number is at 10, I'm going to bet it because I think it should be higher. Again, I think 11 is where this number should be. Cleve, I'm going to sense that because you are sharp and you don't mind taking bets that make you feel a little bit queasy. If you were to be betting this, you might be on the Raiders here. But any thoughts on this game here?
No, actually, I did get a tip off. I was driving home yesterday from the office around lunchtime. I got a tip off that Carr was not going to play, and maybe some others. And the line was still at 5.5. The total was, I think, 44.5. So I immediately grabbed both the under and the Niners. But yeah, so I got lucky there, I guess. But at this point, I just laying double digits on the road, no matter how good the team is always a dicey proposition. I mean, it looks so good on paper, but it's just hard, especially lately. This year, I'm not even sure if any double digit favorites have covered on the road. I have to think about it. I know that the Eagles could not against the Texans. There's a couple other ones that stand out. It doesn't happen often.
It hasn't happened that often.
Yeah. So, and if the Niners were, this was midseason, the Niners were 100% motivated. I could understand it more at 11 or whatever, but they don't. I mean, they're trying, but they're not like going full force. That's the only question is, how motivated are you to really just, push the pedal to the metal? What you need, you're going to need, if you lay double digits, is some defensive turnovers, which is obviously with this defense very possible. But I don't know. It's hard. Stidham isn't very good, but we see it all the time. This game could be 27-10. Late, and all the backups are in, and Stidham just walks up and down the field to get this to 27-17, and then they cover, right? So I personally would stay away. I wouldn't touch either side at this point, but if you got in early like you did, then you're sitting really pretty. So it's a nice early wager. That's real CLV, right?
Yeah. So one game you are touching, the Jets on the road at the Seahawks, -1.5 is the number here with the Jets favored. And, this, I believe, did this flip when the news was released that Mike White was going to play? I don't remember where this opened.
Yeah, it opened. I think Seattle was -1. It was around -1.
Yeah,
to pick them. It was right around there.
Yeah, so it's flipped through 0 towards the Jets, but still in that pick 'em territory. My projections lean slightly towards Seattle, but I haven't bet it. I have no desire to bet them because I know that there's a chance I haven't downgraded them enough based on what we've seen recently out of Geno Smith. And the return of Mike White, I think, gives the Jets an edge here. What do you see in this matchup?
Yeah, so I'm on the Jets. I'm okay laying anything under 3, to be honest. And once you get to kind of pick them to 2.5, it's kind of all the same. It hasn't really mattered. If you look back the last 2 years, you just lay it. It doesn't really make a difference. The team that wins usually covers here. So I'm not worried about, if it flip-flopping between 1 and 2 or whatever. So I don't think the market has fully grasped the difference between Mike White and Zach Wilson. I think people were projecting a couple of weeks ago that maybe it's a point and a half upgrade to Mike White. But once we saw White play, and then we went back to Wilson and saw how much worse he was, I think this really is a 3-point upgrade to me between White and Wilson. And so I don't think that's being fully documented here. I mean, you look at since the beginning of last season, White's 24th out of 58 quarterbacks in EPA. Wilson's 52nd out of 58 quarterbacks. Now, again, the sample size is smaller, but Mike White had to play in some tough conditions. I mean, he played Buffalo twice, including once in snow. He played in a driving rainstorm. Yeah, it was against a bad Bears defense, but in his first start in a driving rainstorm, it's not easy to do. He had to play in Minnesota. Yeah, their defense isn't great, but that's a loud stadium. That's a playoff team. Like, it's not an easy environment. So he's been battle tested from that perspective. Now he has to face Seattle defense, which is one of the worst in the NFL, and they've gotten worse and worse as the year has gone on. I mean, last week was the first time in the last 6 weeks that their defense has held an opposing offense below their season EPA average. So, and in that game, KC was kind of barely even showing anything, and they typically play down to competition. So, and that game still ended in double digits, right? So, this is not the Seattle defense is just they're not playing well, and so I have faith that Mike White's going to be able to put some points on the board. He's got all his weapons. Corey Davis is playing this week. This, the Seattle defense is kind of dead. And we look at defensively, and I think that the team just plays better with Mike White, to be honest. You could see it last week. They were deflated whenever Zach Wilson would just, go 3 and out. And it's just, you could tell they were not up for it. I think they'll play better with Mike White. Defensively, by far, the Jets are the best unit on the field. And if Tyler Lockett doesn't play again, and I don't know if what you've seen, but I can't imagine he plays. And if he does, he's got maybe he has a cast on his hand. I'm not really sure. It doesn't seem like it's a good idea for a receiver. They've got no options outside of DK Metcalf. I mean, Marquise Goodwin was supposed to step up. I know some guys are touting him as a DFS, cheapie last week, and he got shut out and he got hurt. He hurt his wrist during the game. And so you've got 2 great corners. You got 2 top 10 corners in the NFL in Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. So even if you wanted to, move DK Metcalf all over the field, you've got really good cornerback on each side. And then who does Geno go to? He just doesn't have that option. Their right tackle, Abraham Lucas, was a good rookie. He's questionable. He may not play. And I just think that this defense is really going to impact Geno, who's come back to earth lately. So, we've seen Seattle face 3 other top 5 elite level defenses, the Niners twice and Denver in the opener. They scored 17, 0, and 13 points in those games. When they've had to step up in competition, they haven't been able to do anything. They only scored 10 points against Kansas City last week. They're just not producing at a level that was even close to the earlier in the year. So I think a lot of maybe your numbers or a lot of people's numbers are maybe, if you're equally weighting all the games, you're probably going to get to that, pick 'em or maybe Seattle's -1. But if you weight the more recent performance a little bit more, and then you take into account that Tyler Lockett may not play or probably won't play, I think that, that gets you to maybe the Jets as a slight favorite. So that's where I'm at. I just think it's a much better team, and I think that Mike White will play well here. So I do like the Jets here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very open to the possibility that I haven't downgraded the Seahawks fast enough to account for what we've seen. And as you mentioned, Tyler Lockett looks like he's going to be out. Marquise Goodwin dealing with the wrist injury, and Will Dissly, I believe, is also out. Not as if he's a major contributor in terms of the overall production, but I mean, he plays a not insignificant number of snaps each game. So just another player there that they kind of depend on, who doesn't seem like he's going to be there. So,
and Kenneth Walker didn't practice yesterday, by the way, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, who knows what's going on with his ankle? And he had a decent game last week, but he hasn't done anything in the last month either. So it's just, this is a completely, if you flip-flopped, if the last 6 weeks was the first 6 weeks of the season, I mean, the Jets would probably be laying 3.5. I think some of the early season numbers are getting baked in here for Seattle, and they're playing more like the kind of the priors coming into this year than they kind of overperformed early in the year. So I'll take the Jets on the road and swallow it.
Yeah. And for my fantasy article, Mike White is one of the guys who is my favorites this week. He's, great matchup, as you mentioned there. Okay. One more game I want to quickly get your thoughts on, not in the outline, but I mean, Monday Night Football. It might not be the game of the year, Bills at Bengals, but I mean, it looks like it's going to be a great game. And, Bengals won, let me see here, 1.5 point underdogs. I believe this number was 2.5 in the look ahead market, which, shout out me. That's where I bet it. And by the way, I should say the Bills, a lot of wide receivers there. One of them is Isaiah McKenzie. We're giving away a free signed Isaiah McKenzie Buffalo Bills mini helmet from Pristine Auction. If you want a chance to win it, subscribe to the Betting Pros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on the video. We will announce a winner in a future episode. Do you have any thoughts on this game? Bills favored by 1 on the road.
I think it's been a great game. I think it'd be a great. You could literally tease either side. Whoever is hits 1.5, just tease that side, and and call it a day.
Yeah.
So at this point, looking like the Bengals, if you can get that's my piece of advice. Maybe pair them up, with a team like either the Steelers or maybe I'm trying to think. There was another team. The Browns is another good teaser leg. If you go Browns and then wait for that 1.5 to pop eventually, hopefully with the Bengals, and you can do that. But yeah, straight ahead. I mean, if I'm in a pick'em pool, I'll take the Bills just because I think they're the better team, and I just trust their defense a little bit more. But it's hard. I mean, this Bengals team. I will say, 2 weeks ago, I was actually on the Bucks in Cincinnati versus Cincinnati. They were blowing them out, and just crazy flurry of. I was actually at dinner. I was on vacation with my family, and I was like feeling good about my pick at halftime. And then I look at my phone, and every 2 minutes, it's Bengals have the ball inside the Bucks territory. I couldn't believe what was going on. I mean, that was a flurry of random occurrences. I mean, 9 times out of 10, the Bucks probably win that game if they don't go crazy with that. And then, last week, Ramondre Stevenson is potentially going in for a game-winning touchdown. The perception here is probably a little bit different. You might get Buffalo at 2.5 to 3. So, I think all things being equal, I would probably lean Buffalo straight up. But, I think a Bengals teaser is probably your best bet.
Yeah. And Josh Allen on the road for his career historically has been good against the spread. All right, Cleve, thanks for joining us. Awesome stuff. Let the people know where to find you on social and where to follow your work.
Yeah, I mean, my Twitter handle is ClevTA, and then you can see my my website on there, cleveanalytics.com. Just kind of I've got some free stuff up there, but then also got a paywall for subscribers. Just kind of, I'll have a playoff package up there where I write up every single game of the playoffs, side and total that I'm on, a bunch of props, do DFS analysis, kind of a one-stop shop, if you will. For anyone who's looking for some content. So, that's up there on the website. So I appreciate you having me on. This is a good discussion.
All right. He's ClevTA. I am Matthew Friedman at Matt F. The Oracle. Check out Betting Pros and Fantasy Pros for all of my work, best bets, player props, fantasy favorites, player projections and rankings, and more. If you like the show, please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. That is going to do it for this Week 17 Best Bets edition of the Betting Pros podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Good luck and see you next episode.